Well, it's a little past time for us to get rolling again here in looking at the book of Acts. We're studying in chapter 23 of the book of Acts, where Paul is going to be taken up to stand trial before Felix, the governor. And last time we began studying this chapter in chapter 23 with Paul's defense before the Sanhedrin. When he saw that he wasn't going to get a fair trial, he divided and was able to escape. The judges there, he said, "I'm a Pharisee." And they began to argue about the resurrection and whether there is going to be a resurrection at all. And Paul was rescued by the commander and taken out. And then there was a plot formed against Paul to assassinate him. And that's really where we left off last time. Before we get into the lesson, though, let's begin with the word of prayer. We'll ask Brother Brody to direct our minds. Amen. All right, so let's look then at this. We're kind of right in the middle of the plot last time where they're going to try to kill Paul. It says, "And when it was day, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves under an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink until they had killed Paul. And there were more than 40 men, or 40, who formed this plot." So there's 40 of these radical assassins that make an oath they're not going to enjoy anything until they kill Paul. And they've got this plot to assassinate him, this ringleader, as they look at it, of Christianity. They're going to get rid of him and not going to be a problem anymore. And they're willing to die to do it. So 40 men sounds like a plot that ought to work. You got 40 men and the Romans don't have a clue what's about to happen. And they came to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a solemn oath to taste nothing until we have killed Paul. Now, therefore, you and the council notify the commander to bring him down to you, as though you were going to determine his case by a more thorough investigation. And we, for our part, are ready to slay him before he comes near the place." So you just go ask for him, and it shows how corrupt the chief priests are, as we mentioned last week, that they would go along with this kind of unlawful murder. But we can see there's a corrupt leadership that's in charge of the land, and they agree, even though they know the plot, they become a part of the plot. They're going to tell the commander, "Send Paul over. We'll be more calm this time. We'll find out, they have a real trial this time around." So it looks like, how could it possibly fail? It says, "But the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, and he came and entered the barracks and told Paul." Through God's providence, somebody in Paul's family overheard what these plotters were planning to do. So it shows how God can answer our prayers and protect us and accomplish His will through natural means, through His overruling providence that works in the world. He's worked it many times. He's working in our lives. He's got a purpose for us. And we need to trust Him and pray to Him, and all things will work together for the good of our soul. That's what the Bible promises, right? You ask anything according to His will, He will do it. So how's Paul going to get delivered from this? Well, one person overhears. That's all it took. He comes in and tells Paul. And then Paul takes action. He doesn't say, "Oh, the Lord promised I'd preach in Rome. I don't have to do anything." That's not what we do with God's promises. God expects us to do everything in our power to fulfill what needs to be done. And then God helps us. That's the way it works. "Give us this day our daily bread." We work for our bread. We do everything we should do planning-wise so we don't go hungry. And the Lord helps us. That's the way it works. He promises we can go to heaven and we can be saved forever. But we got to do the work to cooperate with God. And Paul does that here. I'm going to get to Rome, but I'm going to do everything to help, right? And he makes sure the commander finds out about what this plot is all about. And Paul came out, called one of the centurions to him and said, "Lead this young man to the commander, for he has something to report to him." The centurion is over 100 men, and he must be the one in charge of prisoners. So he's in charge of the keeping that part of the fort. And so they need to get the commander to take this young man, this centurion, to take this young man to the commander. It's something very important that needs to be revealed. The word young man that's used there is a word that's used for somebody between 24 and 40 among the Greeks. Paul was described as a young man named Saul. Same word was used for him when he was like 36. It's used for Timothy. So it's not talking about just a little kid that came in to report this. And he's going to be taken to the commander. Eutychus was the same word was used for him. So he is not just a mere little boy, but yet he is afraid. And we're told the commander takes him by the hand when he's talking to him to try to calm him down. So he may be on the younger end of young man. He, maybe early 20s or so that he is coming to him. So notice he doesn't give this message to the commander third hand. He doesn't say he told the centurion there's a plot, and then the centurion go in and tell the commander there's a plot. No, the commander needs to hear this firsthand, right? Not from Paul, not from the centurion. He needs to hear it from the young man himself, that there is a plot of 40 men that are going to try to kill Paul. So there's a lot of wisdom in that, isn't there? Let's don't get it third hand. Let's get it first hand and give the evidence. So he took him and led him to the commander and said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to lead this young man to you since he has something to tell you. And the commander took him by the hand and stepped aside and began to inquire of him privately, what is it that you have to report to me? So this is something that needs to be kept secret. There is a plot to kill Paul. You don't want it leaking out among the guards that you know about the plot, right? They might go tell the Jews. They might have paid people there that will inform. So he gets his nephew, he says, you go tell the commander privately, personally, what's going on. So that's a lot of wisdom in that too, isn't there? You're not going to take a chance that this is going to get out, but that only the commander is going to know about what's going on. And the commander seems to understand there's something really important here that Paul would send this young man to him, and gets up and goes over away from the other soldiers to talk to him so that nobody's going to overhear it. And he's able to step aside and hear what his nephew has to say. Verses 20 and 21, and he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down tomorrow to the council, as though they were going to inquire somewhat more thoroughly about him. So do not listen to them, for more than 40 of them are lying in wait for him, who have bound themselves under a curse, not to eat or drink until they slay him. And now they are ready and waiting for the promise from you. So Lysias gets the full understanding about what this message is. And I mean, it's a real threat. It would be something if I told you there's one man out there seeking to kill a prisoner or something. Why, the whole jail would be on alert. What if I said there's 40 men and they're under a curse that they will die in order to kill Paul? I mean, yeah, you've really got a crisis on your hands. Don't listen to these Jewish leaders and send him down, because they're surely going to attack. They're already out there waiting, and this is going to be a huge problem. Can you imagine? This is the time of the feast and all. I mean, this could turn into a full-scale riot if they have to have a battle right there outside the courthouse. In verses 22 through 24, look at Lysias. He takes complete control of this situation and gets Paul to a safe place. Therefore the commander let the young man go, instructing him, tell no one that you have notified me of these things. So we got to keep this secret till we can get Paul out of town. So you don't go tell anybody else. And he called to him 2 of the centurions and said, get 200 soldiers ready by the 3rd hour of the night to proceed to Caesarea with 70 horsemen and 200 spearmen. And they were also to provide mounts to put Paul on and to bring him safely to Felix the governor. So here is this plot of 40 men. We're going to have an overwhelming force to get Paul out of town. Make sure there's not only going to be any harm that's going to come to him, and they're going to do it secretly at an unknown time to the plotters. They're not going to be able to know when this big group of troops are going to come out of the fort and head for Caesarea. So 2 centurions, they're over 100 men each, and they're called in. We're going to get 200 soldiers, and they're going to go all the way with Paul. They're not going to go all the way with Paul to Caesarea. They're going to leave at 9, and he's going to have 70 horsemen, and they will go all the way to Caesarea. They're going to take Paul all the way till he gets to the governor. They'd go. They take half the cavalry that they had there in Jerusalem. Under a cohort, they had 120, or two, I guess it's 120 horsemen, and they're taking 70 to take Paul. So 470 soldiers to take one prisoner and make sure he gets up there to the governor. He's a Roman citizen, and we're not going to let him get assassinated here in town. So Lysias, he is very efficient man. He knows what to do to get Paul to a safe place. And they have extra mounts. Notice the plural there. I guess Paul had several horses he could change from one to another, or there were soldiers on either side of him that, maybe he was chained to, or they had multiple horses. Maybe Luke and some others were with Paul. They're going to take them too. I don't know. But there's extra horses that are talked about that they're going to have made ready for him. And then Felix is the governor at that time, and might say a few words about Felix. Felix was a man that rose up from being a slave and served or at least his brother Paulus was a friend of Claudius Caesar and a servant of his. And when Claudius became Caesar, Paulus, was one of his right-hand man, his servant, and he got his freedom. And then his brother, Felix, got his freedom too, and started being given these government posts through the influence of his brother that was helping the emperor. And so he ended up being made a joint ruler with Commodus, which was one of the the governors over Judea back in 52. He'd also been over Samaria as a judge in 48. So he was well acquainted. Paul's going to say that at his trial, that I feel confident talking to you, Felix, because you know about the Jewish people. He'd been working with the Jewish people at least since 48, and now it's 58. So, he's been in Judea for a long time, and he knows all about the things of the Jews. And he's going to stay in power until 60 A.D. That's when Festus takes over, and he's called back to Rome, and he is a real, Tacitus describes him as somebody that was he ruled as a governor, but he had the mind of a slave. Tacitus is one of the elites, that wrote that history, and he really looks down on Felix as just being a cruel, narrow-minded, small-minded, greedy guy that was ruling because of his brother there in Judah. And he does cause all kinds of trouble that leads to the destruction of Jerusalem. The Jews are getting so fed up with people like Felix that they're going to rebel, right, against the Romans. So Felix, it doesn't have much character, but that's who the governor is that's residing there in Caesarea when Paul is brought to town. Verses 26 and 27, or 25 and 26. And he wrote a letter having this form. We're talking about Lysias, the commander there at the fort of Antonia there in Jerusalem. He writes a letter to go along with Paul the prisoner. And it's something, it already mentioned that the centurion called him the prisoner Paul. That's almost a title for Paul, isn't it? In his letters, he calls himself the prisoner. He was a special kind of prisoner. There's no other person like the Apostle Paul. He must have been everybody. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was the prisoner, that everywhere he went. And anyway, he writes a letter on behalf of the prisoner, Paul, says, Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent Governor Felix, greetings. So he had to send up why am I sending this man up here to you with all of these, half the cavalry coming up there to deal with this man. He tries to explain to him what's going on. And, we have this letter here in the book of Acts, and it's been wondered, how did Luke know what was in this letter? He could have had a copy of the letter. Maybe Paul had a copy of the letter that it was going to be delivered to, what the official situation was. The Romans, just like us, they have, you got to have all your paperwork in order, right, when you work in the government. And everybody gets their copy and all that. That was going on back then, too. So maybe he actually is giving us the actual letter that was given to Paul and given to Felix. Or at least maybe he heard it read out and he could tell us what was in it. And he has the guidance of the Holy Spirit. He wouldn't make a mistake on what the contents were. So sends this letter up. Let's look at the letter. And it's very true to life. If you think about Lysias, he's a Roman commander, and he wants to make himself look good, right, to his superiors. So he's not going to tell the story exactly straight. He tells the story in a way that makes him look good. Isn't that the way people always try to act? And we're tempted to do the same thing whenever we tell a story that we're involved in, to make ourselves look good and be the hero of the story. And that's being dishonest, right? So we need to not do that. Tell the story the way it actually happened. And it says, when this man was arrested by the Jews and was about to be slain by them, I came upon them with the troops and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman. Is that what happened? Sorta, but not right. That's not right, is it? He didn't know Paul was a Roman. He just saw this guy getting attacked in this disorder, and he rushed in and tried to figure out what's going on. And it was later on he found out he was a Roman, but he makes himself out, well, I saw this Roman citizen out there, and I had to do something. So I came down and rescued him. Yeah, he's going to beat the truth out of him. It's only Paul had to reveal it to him later. So, it just shows, doesn't the Bible have the ring of truth to it? I mean, this is exactly how people are. And this letter sounds exactly like a real letter. Doesn't sound like some made-up letter. That's exactly the way a Roman would talk to his superior and talk about, I was doing this job, that I'm doing. I'm worthy of promotion. In verses 28 through 30, says, and wanting to ascertain the charges for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to their council. And I found him to be accused over questions about their law, but under no accusation deserving death or imprisonment. And when I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, also instructing his accusers to bring charges against him before you. So I tried to do this the reasonable way and find out what charges against this Roman citizen. And I took him down to their council, and it wasn't about he did some unlawful thing that we Romans would recognize as a problem, but it was some kind of religious dispute going on between the Jews. That's what this was about. And then I found out that these radicals were actually going to assassinate this Roman citizen. And so I knew I had to send him up there for protection to you. And I've told these Jewish leaders that they've got to come up there and present their charges before you. So he has taken care of this fellow Roman citizen, and now Felix is apprised of the situation, and the governor will know what to do, and we can make sure that things are carried out properly. So pretty good letter, right? I mean, it does explain, gives us the summary of what's going on. So in verse 31, so the soldiers, in accordance with their orders, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. So they travel 30 miles. I love being a soldier, don't you? You're just sitting around the barracks, and they go, 9 o'clock, we're leaving, we're marching 30 miles. Right? That was, and they're going to turn around and march the 30 miles back the same night. Think about that. You got to be a tough guy to be a Roman soldier. And you just get the call, it's time to go. 400 of us are heading out. And they go up the road, the 30 miles, till they get to Antipatris. And then those soldiers will come back that same night. Well, we can't leave Jerusalem unprotected, right? I mean, they need to get back. So only the 70 horsemen are going to go on. So they go to this Antipatris, which was named after the father of Herod the Great. It's in the mountains there. You come through the mountains, and now you get to Antipatris, and there's just a plain that goes on to Caesarea. And so they've gotten out of the danger place where you'd be ambushed and all, that they needed all those soldiers with them. And they can turn around and go back. It's near Aphek that you read about in the Old Testament, sort of on the border where Samaria and Judea come together there. And 10 miles north of Lydda that we read about, where you had Tabitha and all of those things happen there with Peter. So a large mound of dirt is there that from where that ancient city was in the Bible times that archaeologists can dig through. So it's a real important crossroads. There's a reason cities get built where they do. And it goes back to 3000 BC, there's been cities built there where Antipatris is at. So it was a strategic location there as you come down out of the mountains and you get to the plain. And all of these different regions are kind of divided there. It says, but the next day, leaving the horsemen to go with him, they returned to the barracks. So again, when I was in the military, I went through, BUDS or the SEAL team training stuff, and we went a whole week during Hell Week where you didn't sleep. So soldiers can do a lot of things. When you're commanded to do it, you can do it. And these guys, no sleep, march all night up there, turn around, march all the way back. That's just part of the job, right? We hear about people going on a 50-mile hike or whatever in the Army or whatever. They go on a 30-mile up, 30-mile back, and back in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Paul gets taken on to the governor. So that brings us then to the next section of the book of Acts. We had Paul in Jerusalem and all of the things going on in Jerusalem when he came back and delivered that money for the poor saints and tried to show everybody that he wasn't opposed to the customs of the Jews by paying for those men under a vow, and then he got arrested at the temple, and then we've had all of this chaos that's happened with the Jewish court and the plot, and now we have him at Caesarea. He's going to be in Caesarea for 2 years as a prisoner. So think about it. You haven't done a thing wrong. You're not guilty of anything, but you're in jail for 2 years. And then you're going to get sent to Rome, and you're going to be in jail 2 more years in Rome. And you haven't done anything wrong. That's Paul. Paul the prisoner for 4 years. And so he is sent to Felix here in the end of the chapter. If I was dividing the chapters, and they didn't ask me back in 15 whatever when they divided the chapter, this would have been a good place to divide the chapter and make this chapter 24. But they divided it once he starts his defense before Felix is where they divide it. So then he has his trial before Felix in verses 1 through 23 of chapter 24. Then he'll stand before Felix and Drusilla. They try to bring him in to listen to him preach, and they're hoping they can get a bribe from him to get out of jail. It's really their motive, but Paul preaches to Felix and Drusilla, and till he scares them so much with his sermon that they don't want to hear him anymore, I guess. And then he has a new governor come in after 2 years, Festus, and he preaches before Festus. He's got this prisoner been locked up for 2 years. His case is still not settled. And he preaches to him, and then he'll preach to King Agrippa about his situation also. Verse 33 says, and when these had come to Caesarea, the 70 escorts and Paul and whoever was with Paul, they come to Caesarea and deliver the letter to the governor. They also presented Paul to him. So they make the rest of their journey, the next 30 miles or so to Caesarea, and enter into Caesarea probably late in the day, the next day. They started off at 9 o'clock the night before. Now they're in the afternoon of the next day. They come into town, and it must have been quite a parade to see this 70 soldiers coming in. And they got one prisoner with them that they're bringing in. Here is Caesarea. It's pretty well, I was one of those places I saw several YouTube videos and things about Caesarea where people are, walking around there and filming the place. Here is Herod's palace where Paul was kept, was here. There's a big hippodrome where they race horses that were over there, and a big theater here, and an amphitheater that's there at Caesarea. It was a city built by Herod the Great. One of the reasons he's called great, he was great at surviving and always choosing the right side, whether it was Antony or Octavian Caesar, and gained control over the whole area where the Jews lived there in Palestine. He ruled that whole area. He was a great builder. He rebuilt Jerusalem and the temple, and built Masada, that great fort that people go over there and tour on top of the mountains there in the Dead Sea Valley area. And he built the city of Caesarea to honor Caesar and to make a seaport where there was no seaport. All this cement and stuff was poured to make an artificial harbor, and a lot of it's still there from the time that he built that place. And it became the capital for all the Roman governors after Herod the Great. And you can still go tour those ruins that are there today. There's part of the pavement of that palace that Paul was brought into, maybe where he, was standing and stood before Felix, and all of these things were taking place. That's the floor of the place. It's still there. And you can see down the beach there to where the harbor was built. And when he had read it, he reads the letter. He asked from what province he was. And when he learned that he was from Cilicia, he said, I will give you a hearing after your accusers arrive also, giving orders for him to be kept in Herod's praetorium. So it was Herod's palace, but now it's the Roman governor's palace, or praetorium there. And he is taken in. I'm sure they had cells for special prisoners and all of that were inside that building from the time of Herod to be kept in custody. The first thing he asked about is what a judge would ask about today. Is, do I have jurisdiction over this case? Where is this Roman citizen from? And they had district courts just like we have. And Cilicia, you remember, you got Judah, and then above Judah you have Samaria and Syria, and then Cilicia, as you start going around into Anatolia or into what's Turkey today, is where Paul was from Cilicia. All of that was one big district. And any case, then, in that district, Felix could hear it. And so he says, okay, I'll hear your case. Where are you from? And we'll have the trial. And the Jewish leaders have been ordered to get up there, right? And don't you think Lysias had some pressure he could put on him? I know about this plot. Now you better get up there to the governor and bring your charges up there. I don't imagine they're going to mess around being connected with a plot. They better get up there and present their case. And so in 5 days, they're going to be up there to present their case before Felix. And so Paul's now locked up for 5 days, we're going to find out, here in Caesarea, waiting for his trial. Here's some other pictures of Caesarea. Just think about Herod the Great building all of that out of nothing. Just an empty place on the coastline. It has a wall that goes around it. If you look on the north side, there's an aqueduct that was built to bring water down from the mountains to give water to the city. Think of, you talk about a building project and how much was involved in all of that. And then to pour all of that cement and stone and everything to make a harbor to protect all of the ships from the sea. And a lot of it's still there. This lasted all this time. It's still sitting there. It's, of course, not used today like it was back then, but quite a massive thing. Here's another picture looking up the beach. Here's the palace where Paul was kept, Herod's praetorium. And it's the first building sticking out there on this end, and then the harbor's up to the north. You can see that horse racetrack they got there, and the theater that's there. The ruins are very clearly seen in that picture below it. So pretty amazing. I haven't been over there to walk around, but at least I got some pictures from somebody else that's walked around there and took some pictures. So then in chapter 24, is that the first bell or the second bell? First bell? Okay. So we can at least introduce the proceedings here. Paul's going to have his trial now before Felix. Says, and after 5 days, the high priest Ananias came down with some elders, with a certain attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. So they're taking this trial pretty serious. They send the high priest. Like Lysias says, you better get up there. I know about the plot. So the high priest himself shows up. And he's got a number of the leading elders of the Sanhedrin that come. And they think this trial is important enough, they've hired an attorney. They have a Greek or Roman, it seems, attorney. That he's got a Greek or Roman name anyway. He is going to do the arguing for them. And their attorneys were like our attorneys today. They're professional pleaders on, they'll take either side of the case, right? I mean, if you're paying them to be the defense, then they'll offer all the arguments for the defense. If you're paying them to accuse somebody, then they'll go all out to try to convict the person, right? That's the way the courts work, way their business work. And Tertullus is going to, of course, try to slander Paul and everything the best he can to convict him. And so you got Tertullus, the professional lawyer in the court of the Romans here, to come up and to try to be involved in this. And of course, he has great knowledge of Roman law. The word for an attorney that's used is orator, because that's what they do. It's all about words, right? It's all about putting your argument together and trying to sway the judge or the jury, whichever way. That's what they are. They are orators, right? They should be experts in the law, and they should be about justice, but I don't know, they're more orators in a way than they are a lot of times than just interested in the law. They just want to win, right? And so he has come up to bring the charges and present the indictment here against Paul. It says, and after Paul had been summoned, so they call the prisoner in, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying to the governor, since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms are being carried out for this nation. So he begins laying it on thick for the governor Felix. Now Felix is a crook. He is really a low-life person. He has used every different kind of scheme to try to steal money from the Jewish people. But if you're standing before him as a lawyer and you're trying to persuade him for your side, you're going to talk about all of his excellent qualities, right, that he has. And that's the way he talks to him. We have got so much peace because of you. And he had put down, certain rioters and rebellions that had happened. Of course, he had also been involved in some of them, but he had put down a lot of things. So he praises him about bringing all this peace and order to Judea. And he says, through your providence, there's great reforms are being made to make this a better place, right? Do you use the word providence? How often do you use the word providence to talk about a human being? Providence is like God's forethought and care for us is providence. But he's addressing the governor like you'd talk to the Caesar. He has divine Caesars. Providence is taking care of the Roman Empire, right? He's addressing him like he's a god, almost, right? That your providence is really helping the nation and doing so much good. In 2 years, he's going to be removed from office and have a trial in Rome, and it's only his brother that saves him from getting executed. He's such a bad governor. But anyway, he's got a couple of years left. But if you're going to talk to somebody, you try to talk to him with respect, and here he even flatters him and butters him up. Paul won't go that far. Says, we acknowledge this in every way and in everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness. So you're such a great ruler, such a great guy. Everybody everywhere knows how great you are and how good a ruler and governor you are. And we're all just so thankful. Talk about slobbering all over the guy in the court. But he's trying to get in his good graces. Well, we'll have to come back and look at his actual charges, Lord willing, next time.